It is the fifth and final model introduced in the 2024 Bang Brave Bravern collaboration, sporting the iconic character in a powered-up armor. It is BRV04, Brave Burn, with a kit of Brave Blast, Hypercharged Blade, Armor Drain, Biped Legs, and the leg ability of Auto Charge, which passively fills Medaforce gauge for every action completed. Now, as a model that we've seen relatively early on in the first week as standard Brave Burn, this new version of the model takes the already impressive kit that it had at its disposal, changes it around just a little bit, and introduces one last new skill to part ways with us on as we crest in the final week of the collaboration, featuring the first ever instance of a skill that will, at long last, serve as a proper antithesis and counterpart to the iconic Sujigiri that we see in current competitive meta. Brave Blast on the head part is a shooting-based skill that serves twofold conditions based on what direction the foe is when you attack them. If you manage to attack a foe forward-facing you in their heat phase, you will deal triple the intended damage, and I believe piercing also is included. However, if you attack your foe in the backside in their cool phase, you will instead deal half of your intended damage. Now, this serves, like I said, as at long last the counterpart to the ever iconic Sujigiri, or backslash as we've known in current competitive meta, which serves actually as the complete opposite as a melee skill, where it deals triple damage if stabbing a foe in the back and half if you attack them from the front. Brave Blast as a shooting skill is going to be very interesting to see if it actually will make a change in the current incoming meta, as a new way to keep an edge on the competition in a game of speed and of chance. Hypercharged Blade on the right arm is a melee attribute skill, which basically is Charge Blade 2.0. Upon using Charge Blade, it will consume a fair amount of charge, about 15% or so on use, but it will also give you a much higher damage output than would standard Charge Blade. However, unlike Emit Blade, which Brave Burn had in its base model in week 1, Hypercharged Blade can be used repeatedly over and over, whether you have a charge or whether you do not. But just bear in mind that even if it is expensive to use, it does give you a very promising damage bonus, and even if you don't have a charge, a base power of almost 1800 is still pretty tough to beat, with a very solid blow one way or another. Armor Drain on the left arm is another conventional melee skill that, upon attacking the opponent and you have a certain amount of charge in your gauge, will allow you to steal in a percentage of the damage you deal and restore lost HP with it. This will give Brave Bravern here a hand in overall survivability, as it means that as long as nothing is broken on him, he can resort to Armor Drain at almost any given time to allow him to keep his HP as full as possible. Even if he's being beaten into a wall, as long as nothing's broken, he's still got a chance to bounce back. Biped Legs means he's going to have very solid coverage across all terrains, but unlike his previous form where he had Adapter, which is A rank on all terrains, not currently at A or S, he changes the ability out for Auto Charge, which will give him just a little bit better overall synergy with his attacks, which will passively boost his charge gauge every turn an action is completed, regardless of whatever that action is. Yes, by the way, that also means that when you choose to charge Medaforce, you will get an impressive 40% back instead of your standard 30%. When it comes to leg stats, he's packing some pretty hefty numbers there at a base 874 for his mobility, so off to a very good start there. An evade of 797 isn't too shabby. He won't be dodging or grazing a lot, but the chance is certainly there, and he may or may not rely on a lot of extra bonuses and outside assistance to try to help ensure he can dodge or graze successfully. But a melee resist of almost 2,000 at 1897 and a shoot resist at 1107 does kind of round him out pretty nicely. While he most certainly can hold his own up close and personal, his shooting resistance isn't too bad either, as it means he won't get knocked out or crippled by that long-range sniper exchanging blows with him. So he can most certainly hold his own pretty easily. And a heavy support of 3 parts means it's going to be a very well-rounded leg, whether you use him as a pure set or as mixed parts. In the armor department, he is a pretty chunky fella as well, included with the armor, with a head HP of about 5879, right arm at 4500, left arm at 4619, and legs at 5519. Very healthy overall HP pool as well, as a model you really can't go wrong with that can take a beating pretty fairly without breaking too easily. All this being said though, as a pure set score, I honestly have to rate Bang Brave Bravern a pretty solid middle ground upper 7.5 out of 10. Much like his base form was, but to a lesser degree, Bang Brave Bravern, I should say, actually is pretty solid and pretty synergetic. Between Auto Charge, Hyper Charge Blade, and Armor Drain, those three actually work together very nicely. As a reminder, Armor Drain can't use the Vampiric effect if you don't have Charge, and Hyper Charge Blade, like I said, requires you to have a certain amount of charge if you're actually going to have that damage bonus. Brave Blast is probably going to be the only odd piece out on him, as it's a piece that doesn't require him to actually have a charge in his gauge, but it's going to be more there for crowd control and, to a point, speed juggling if you're able to consistently outrun or properly time you outrunning the foe facing forward. As mixed parts, I do have to rate him equally at a 7.5 out of 10 for these same reasons. Even if you were to take all of his parts and exchange just the head for something else, whether it be Bond Upper from the original Brave Burn, or someone else that can be very Medaforce synergetic with this kit, you really can't ever go wrong with this design, and it's a pretty solid build if you use as pure set or mixed. Hyper Charge Blade and Auto Charge, for instance, will synergize incredibly well together. Armor Drain, maybe not as much. You could probably fit that in with something a little different with mixed parts, something a little more synergetic to the kit, but still very good for survival purposes all the same. However, I do also want to mention one parting note here that does kind of serve as a concern, I should say, for Brave Blast. And while it does sound really good on paper that if you're attacking someone forward facing, you punish them, or half damage if you're not, one thing I do want to point out and primarily is the heat and cool stats of his parts across the board. When it comes to Brave Blast, he's already sitting in the low 500s for the heat and mid 600s for cool. So for something that's going to prioritize speed, you're going to be focusing really heavily on comping that with your leg mobility and even your passive Marauder if you want to try to take advantage of that. Otherwise, I would not recommend using Brave Blast turn 1, and probably after turns 2 or 3 once the battle starts scattering and you can properly juggle it. Unless, of course, you can guarantee that you're going first, then that's a different story. Hyper Charge Blade, like I said, is going to be a very solid part. You really can't go wrong with anywhere, and even with a relatively low success at 928, having heat in the low 600s, or rather heat and cool in the high 500s, low 600 is a pretty well-rounded area, especially for that base power of 1800. And Armor Drain, a little bit higher on that end, success at mid 1400s, heat at over 700. Not too bad, something you can kind of pop in and out with moderately quickly if you know what you're doing.